I'll click the button to go live now.
Sounds good. All right.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to rare Sunday morning recording of the Keeping Karlsson live show here. You'll notice I'm not here with Brian. I'm here with Ian Gooding from Dobber Hockey. I'll do a proper intro when we start the show. But yeah, hey Ian, how's it going?
Hey, Elon. Good to be on the show for finally.
Yeah, it's been forever, or not forever, like literally forever, the
Yeah.
actual way people say it. Yeah, thanks for everyone who's watching live here on a Sunday. No, we normally record on a Sunday night. Ian's on the West Coast, so we've got really early for you actually. I guess it's like 8 a.m. I was definitely still asleep at that time over
Yeah.
here.
Still drinking my coffee.
All right, so I guess with that, I'll just start the actual show here. All right, let me just start. Oh, I should probably actually record it. Okay, one sec, recording here, recording on Zoom. Okay, I've got all the backup recordings going. All right. Uh, Yeah! Yes! Welcome everybody to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by a guy who loves pouring over projections even more than his morning coffee. I am your host, Elon Dubrovsky, and with me is not Brian Combe. He's taking a break, but that's okay because we've got a ringer in here for you for the first time ever on Keeping Karlsson, which I'm surprised about because we've talked about him and to him like very often. It's the managing editor at Dobber Hockey, the writer of countless articles and daily ramblings at that site, also the managing editor of the world famous Dobber Hockey Fantasy Guide, which recently released its 17th edition. It's Ian Gooding. Welcome to the show, Ian.
Hey, thanks, Elon. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to have you on the show here. We've got a lot to get to because I've been looking over this guide and you've graciously agreed to come on the show so we can talk through all the various projections, the other goodies in this guide. And yeah, obviously, for the most part, I agree with what Dobber put and like what the different projections are, but that wouldn't be any fun, right? To just like talk about the things we agree on. So I picked out some players that I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. I thought maybe the projections were a little, higher than I would have gone or lower than I would have gone. So that's going to be the plan for today's show. I'm super stoked about it. But I guess before we get into like some specific players, for those who like don't know, do you want to give a quick overview of Dobber Hockey's guide and like all the goodies people can find within?
Sure. The Dobber Hockey Fantasy Guide. I imagine many of your listeners will already be familiar with it, but if not, it covers everything you need to know about fantasy hockey for the coming year. I should say everything, but I mean it has. But just to put it this way, there's a lot of information in here. So
Oh yeah.
just to give you a quick overview of the table of contents here. There's a breakdown of the schedule and what you need to know. I think that's I know you emphasize that in your podcast about paying attention to that every given week. Sleeper picks, you have if you're looking for the latest rookies, you'll find those in there. Draft review, players to potentially who could drop in value, goalies, which article I've written, goalies to watch, not necessarily the top goalies, but the ones that might change in value. You might have some interest in. There's stuff on advanced stats for those of you into that. You have your you also have your projections by team. That's an important one. So every single player, that's a lot of where the meat is of this fantasy guide is the projections, and it goes right down to the fourth line, seventh defenseman, two or three goalies. There's literally no stone left unturned when it comes to this, and write-ups on every team, not just the projections, but write-ups, observations. If you're in the multi-category leagues, we've written about hits, players to watch for that category, contract year, goaltending, write-ups on the goaltending situation. There's a whole lot more. I probably haven't covered it all in there, but it's if you're looking for value in terms of the amount of information that you can get, this is the Dobber Hockey Fantasy Guide is second to none.
Yeah, definitely. It's so fun to just like when it first comes out, and I love being able to read through all the articles, like you say, lists of different like players that maybe are sleepers and like players that maybe are going to be overvalued, all that. And then yeah, the every single team, I love just being able to look, and it's like not only projections for all the players, but Dauber's predicted like the line combos of what it'll be like, who's going to be on the top power play and the second power play. So it's just so fun to sort of pour through this, and I guess that's what we could do as an abridged version here on this show, pouring over it just a little bit. And then for those of you who want to get it, obviously the guide, the great thing also is that the way you guys update it all throughout the preseason, so you can buy it once and then continue to download it. If people want to check it out, just go to dobberhockey.com. Keeping Karlsson's also very proudly presented by dobberhockey.com. So yeah, we definitely encourage people to check it out. For those of you who though haven't bought it yet, we actually have a giveaway we're going to be able to do on this show. So I guess one job for us, Ian, as we go through the guide and go through some of these projections, is we'll have to come up with a hashtag. Maybe at the end of the show, we'll announce what people need to tweet at us in order to enter our giveaway. We have 5 guides also to give away. But yeah, I was thinking, yeah, let's just get into some of these projections then. Like I said, there's a lot of players that I agree with. Like he's got Nick Suzuki for around 71 points. Yeah, okay. I just happen to have the Habs page up right now. So I was looking, yeah, I don't really have much to ask you about that. It seems to make sense based on what's been going on in his career. But there's a few players that I'm a little bit interested in getting a deeper dive into how these numbers came. By the way, so it's Dobber himself that came up with these projections. Am I right? Like he came up with all of them, but you're like the managing editor. So what part did you play in coming up with all these projections?
Yeah, Dobber does the projection, so I can't take the heat for any of those. I only get to come on and critique them. But the sections that I did, I mentioned that I wrote the goalies to watch article, which is about 12 goalies that may change in value, may want to pay attention to. I'm accounting for both single season leagues and keeper leagues down the road, so a little bit for everyone in there. In terms of write-ups, I did part of the write-ups by team. The ones that I covered myself were the injury alerts, which cover which players might have had off-season surgeries, maybe had their seasons cut short last season by injury, and what their status is like coming up for the season. Even if they're going to be healthy for training camp, is just in case people are wondering. Contract year, which are people on the players on the final year of their contract. Who's going to is it going to affect their performance much? What has their track record been like in previous years? I've tried to dig that up whenever I can, although it's kind of difficult for younger players to do that. Break as well. I did the hits as well, which players seem to be, if you're looking for hits, maybe at your end of the week and you're trying to fill your hits category in your multi-category league, what are some options are in terms of players, or just guys that you can put in your deeper leagues and just kind of, and they can tally up the hits and don't have to really think about it. And the goaltending as well. So which players, what's a team's goaltending situation like? I mean, some of the ones like Tampa Bay and Winnipeg and Vancouver, they seem pretty straightforward. You know who the starters are for those teams, but there's going to be some other ones in there. Maybe the teams like, just off the top of my head, maybe a team like LA, or I'm trying to think of another one here that might be, even Colorado's might be a little bit, maybe a little bit unsure of. But we try to break it down there, and which goalie appears to be the starter, and what's the likelihood as well that goalie will end up getting the majority of the starts.
Yeah, I find that helpful. It's not like a guarantee, but yeah, there's always a like message on each team of like which goalie he's like Dobber's confidence in that the goalie will be the starter. On Arizona here, Vejmelka 100%, and then yeah, like you said, there's a lot of teams where Brian and I just did our Schmore Goalies Board episode last week where we went through all of the goalies and tried to tier them for their fantasy values. And yeah, for some teams we were just like had to throw our hands up in the air and just say like I have no idea. It could be one guy or the other. I guess with Colorado we were kind of leaning towards Georgiev being the starter and Francouz being the backup, but again, it's like so I see here Dobber has 65% in Georgiev. So I think that sounds about right. That probably matches my confidence. But okay. Yeah, let's dive into then some of these projections. No, actually wait. So okay. I'll just edit that. You mentioned the contract year and how you wrote a bit about that. I'm curious to get your take. Like, Are you of the belief, or have the numbers shown that players on contract years tend to have better results? I know that's like the common wisdom that players, I guess, try harder because they're playing for their next contract. Has that generally played out to be the case?
Yeah, that's what Dauber wanted to emphasize in that piece. I mean, for you can get into another couple of different things like in salary cap leagues, what could that next contract look like? That's now a big one. If somebody's on an entry level deal, they're on a really team friendly contract, but they're playing really well. Then in salary cap leagues, now you're going to have to make room for that player. Is it worth it? You could look at it from that angle, but the Dauber, kind of going way back, the contract year theory is not, has been around for a long time. And what he really wanted to emphasize in that part for each team is is that going to affect, are they going to bump up their level of play based on the fact that they're in a contract year and they're entering free agency. It's kind of like the best comparison I'll use, not necessarily a hockey one, but Aaron Judge in playing for the Yankees, where he's set to become a free agent, and he's hitting a monster number of home runs this year. That's kind of a perfect example of that contract year and what it means.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we saw that Johnny Gaudreau really upped his game last season. Then he got himself a huge contract. Yeah, some interesting big names coming up for UFA in 2023. I know it's a little bit early to be talking about that too much, but maybe if that's something you care about in your draft, trying to get these guys who have a little extra to play for. Patrick Kane has obviously been in the news. Like, is he going to stick
Mm-hmm.
around, or are they going to trade him? But yeah, he's going to be a UFA. Same with Taves. Obviously, less value there. I'm just looking down the list here. Tarasenko, Pasternak. McKinnon is. Oh, well, Colorado's got
McKinnon,
to
yeah.
figure something out with McKinnon. I didn't even realize he was going to be. Yeah, Timo
Mm-hmm.
Meyer. Yeah, so some really big names that are going to be going high in fantasy drafts could potentially be on different teams next year unless their teams can lock them. I got to imagine some
Yeah.
of these guys are going to get long-term contracts for sure. But okay. I guess we've done enough of the preamble. I'm ready to get into some of these projections I came up with. So I'm going to start in Arizona. Okay. Clayton Keller had a huge breakout last season. We all recall he had a bit of a slow start, but then like a torrid finish to end the year, over a point per game for a good stretch before he got injured. He ended the season, though, with a 77-point pace, which was like a breakout for him, right? Like that was the best he'd done since his rookie year. Dobber is very high on Keller. Oh, yeah. I'm going to start with players that Dobber is higher on than maybe I don't want to say that I disagree with, but higher on than maybe I expected him to be. So I want to get like some reasoning behind it. Yeah, Dobber's got Keller just keeping it going and even having a bigger year. He's got him now being point per game for the whole season. He has him projected at 77 points in 77 games. By the way, it's interesting how Dobber projects games played. That'd be something interesting to talk about as well. Like for some players, it seems like Dobber's expecting like a lot of injuries, which I guess makes sense because that happens throughout the years. But I always like to just think of it in terms of the point pace, because who knows if he's going to play or not. I just want to know how the guy will do while he's in my lineup. Yeah, are you ready to draft Clayton Keller as a point per game guy like Dobber has him projected?
Um, I might put him a smidgen under. I don't think I would go too far under. I think we've known Keller has a talent. He's an extremely talented player. We've just been kind of waiting for him to sort of break out, I guess. And he seemed to do that last year and on an Arizona team. The one downside, of course, is that Arizona does not have a lot of players that they can put around him. I mean, there's Nick Schmaltz. If Barrett Hayton ever comes around, I shouldn't say ever comes around. He's still a very young player, but it's not like there's stacks of offensive talent around him either. Mind you, Arizona did have some games where they were really there were a lot of dry spells. There was also that one stretch I think where Schmaltz had like the 7-point game or something ridiculous, and and they were suddenly scoring goals like crazy, and you barely even recognize them. As for the injuries, I mean, that's you can't project every player to reach every 82 games, because I mean, the majority of them don't. There's minor nagging injuries that can occur. There could be a major injury. You can't necessarily, and you don't know when any of them are going to happen. And last season too, on top of all of this, you had the COVID issue, the COVID protocol, which was cutting into games played even further. So I think last season in particular, you needed to have a deep bench. I think I give that as one main reason I was able to win a championship in one of my leagues, is just the fact that I had a deep bench and I could easily rotate guys and if someone got pulled onto COVID protocol. I don't know what this season is going to be like. Maybe we have to account for that. Again, I know they're not going to necessarily track it the same way, but that's you really have to. That's something you may have to keep an eye on anyway.
Yeah, that was so brutal last year, especially when games were getting postponed. It seems like that shouldn't be as much of a case this year because, like you said, they're not going to be testing everyone before every game. Hopefully, obviously, everyone is healthy. But yeah, as far as the Coyotes go, yeah, Dobber's got Keller at a point per game, Schmaltz a little bit lower. Then the next highest scoring forward, according to Dobber's projections, you have to go all the way down to looks like Lawson Krause down as like barely above a half point per game player. So yeah, that's why I'm personally like I like Clayton Keller. I like what he did last year. He was amazing and like. Probably though I wouldn't draft him that high just because I'd be worried. He did it last year, but I just get nervous about someone who doesn't have like such great players to play with. And like we're like basically banking on like Nick Schmaltz to be his trigger man. And like Nick Schmaltz obviously also had this great year, like you said, but it maybe buoyed by a couple really amazing games. That if you just take away a couple games, and all of a sudden he's like his point pace is a lot lower. Okay, how about next up? Let's go to Seattle, another team that struggled last year. And there was a guy there that a lot of people were super high on going to the season, and that was Jared McCann. Like he had been coming off a 61 point pace season with the Penguins in 2020-21. And then he went to Seattle and it kind of looked like, oh, McCann now could be like a top line, top power play guy. He should even get, more ice time than he was getting on Pittsburgh. So maybe that 61 point pace is like a floor. And who knows what he can do now as a top guy on the team. I think people were thinking about like a Marchessault type situation where all of a sudden he could really flourish. He ended up kind of disappointing us. He wasn't terrible, but he only had 50 points in 74 games with Seattle last year. So that's a 55 point pace. But Dobber is like in his projection, like right back to where like my head was at going into last season of like that upside McCann, because he's predicting 24 goals and 60 points in 74 games. That would be a 66 point pace if he played all 82 games. Do you have any sense of why the expected uptick in this projection? Like, is it what I'm saying that he's just wanting to throw away some of the messiness of the first Seattle season and just go back to that high expectation that McCann could potentially hit based on what he was doing in Pittsburgh?
I think the reason for the uptick for McCann would be the fact that Seattle seems to have upgraded a bit in terms of its overall scoring. It's not so much McCann himself. It was remember when he was in Pittsburgh, he had sort of that mini breakout. He had some good talent around him, but last year in Seattle there wasn't much. But he's going to have this season. They're going to have Matty Beniers for a whole year. They just picked up Oliver Bjorkstrand, who Dobber himself is very high on. And also another thing that's mentioned here in the fantasy guide is that Yanni Gourde will also begin the season healthy. Okay, so Yanni Gourde might be more of a middle six option. We don't know if Shane Wright's going to make the team or not, but if he does, then that's potentially another option as well. So it's going to push nothing else. It could be more potential stronger line mates for McCann, but it could also mean more competition for him as well. So he's looking at in terms of improved scoring on the Seattle Kraken.
Sorry, I'll edit that.
No worries.
Yeah, I was about to get water, and then all of a sudden I was like, "Oh, my turn." Okay. Oh yeah, I guess that definitely makes sense, right? Like last season, I'm seeing that McCann's most common centerman was Marcus Johansson, or maybe McCann was playing center and Johansson was on the wing, but they played a lot of time together last year. He also was playing with like Karlsson Kuhlman at times. You said like there was a little bit with Yanni Gourde. He played a lot with Jordan Eberle. So yeah, you could definitely see an uptick there if Bjorkstrand is back to what we thought he could once be. And actually, I'd like to talk about his projection too in just a sec. Yeah, Matty Beniers, if he has a better centerman there, yeah, could be a reason for higher results. And yeah, I mean, I like it. Definitely you'll be able to get McCann probably cheaper than you were able to in drafts last year. So maybe a potentially good sleeper pick. I definitely would say you don't need to necessarily grab McCann as like a 66 point pace guy in your drafts. Even if you do believe he's going to get that pace, maybe I would rather pick at that point someone who's, done it before, someone you can rely on, and then maybe McCann will still be around for you for your next pick and you could get him at some
Mhm.
value. But yeah, you brought up Bjorkstrand. So let me just bring him up. In general, seems like Dobber's pretty high on a lot of these players going to new teams. Like I'm generally kind of wimpy with these situations. Like I worry that maybe in a new situation, a player will take time to adjust, or maybe won't go. You know, you always like to imagine like, oh, Nazem Kadri going to a new team. Like who knows how exciting he'll be now that he gets new line mates. But you know, then I start to worry like, oh, maybe his line mates aren't actually as good as in their old situation. But like as far as Bjorkstrand goes, he kind of disappointed last year. 58-point pace. He's never broken a 64-point pace in his career. But yeah, Dobber's got him having a career year in pace at 68. So is this just a situation where, again, like we're expecting him to finally get like that primo deployment, top line, like top power play, really good line mates that he wasn't able to hold on to over in Columbus?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's not like Columbus is stacked with offensive options either, and Bjorkstrand could rise to the top, but for some reason, he didn't there. I'm maybe not quite as high on Bjorkstrand as Dauber is. He's still a very serviceable player. I don't think you should be picking him before pick 100 in your drafts. I think if it's before then, I think you're reaching for him. But in terms of after pick 100, it could turn out to be a very good value pick. Um, I suppose Beniers, I like Beniers. I think he's got a lot of upside. So Bjorkstrand, I think, potentially could push the upper limits of his projections. Like Dauber has him as upside is 83 points. So upside is, I'll just explain in picking up the fantasy guide here, doesn't refer to he will reach that one day, but it's sort of more of one day if everything goes right. I'm just paraphrasing here. That may not be exactly how Dauber has it, but that's sort of my understanding of what the long-term upside is for a player. So, but yeah, he's very, very high on Bjorkstrand. Again, he'll get the minutes in Seattle. I don't think there's any question about that, given what other options that there are. He should be a top six player for sure there. I don't know. I'm not quite there on him exploding, I guess. So I think I'd have to agree with you as far as your take on Bjorkstrand.
Yeah, just a little bit of trepidation. We definitely have seen Bjorkstrand go on runs in Columbus a couple seasons ago. I remember like he sort of had a slow start to the year, kind of like a Clayton Keller from last season, right? Like Bjorkstrand did that. He was the first one to pull a Clayton Keller, and I remember like exploded and was just getting points every single game for a long stretch in Columbus. And people were really excited for him for the following season, and he was like decent, but like fell off a little. Then yeah, last year another bit of a fall off. But yeah, new situation. Dobber's got, I see in the line projections here, Bjorkstrand on a top line with Beniers and Burakovsky, and then Schwartz, Gourde, and McCann on the second line. So yeah, those are great line mates for McCann and Bjorkstrand. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Obviously, we'll learn a lot in preseason also once we get to see the power plays and stuff. We have our own site. I know Dobber, you guys have Frozen Tools where there's some line. Oh wait, that's not the line. No, sorry, one sec. What's the site again on this is for I'll edit it. I'll edit this. Like what's the place again for the line combinations? That's you guys have like
Frozen
the
tools.
yeah, it is Frozen Tools. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. Okay, I got that. Sorry. Once again.
Yeah, sometimes people get it confused with call. I think it was originally called Frozen Pool, or that was used, but the name that's been settled on now is Frozen Tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I use it a lot actually. I just like blanked on like the line combos, but like, oh yeah. So I'll just say, yeah, definitely once preseason comes, we'll learn a lot more about the line combinations. Frozen Tools is like super valuable because you guys have a way to see the live combinations like live in game. You can see, and even in preseason games. So it's a really fun way to track how things are going. And also, we have our own Twitter account that we made out over at Keeping Karlsson headquarters here called Game Day Lines. So, and then we have a website, gamedaylines.com. So, yeah, we'll be tweeting out as like beat writers are sharing what the line combinations are looking like in practice. So if you use those two resources, you'll maybe be able to get a little hint of if Bjorkstrand and McCann can be as good as these projections. But yeah, Seattle will definitely be an interesting team next year. A lot of changes, which should make them better. Yeah, bringing in Wright, Beniers, and Burakovsky can only help. Though, like I said, could potentially also bump some people, down the lineup depending on how good those players are. Okay, so let's go to another player that had a breakout in the past, similar to McCann or Bjorkstrand, but then has sort of slowed down over the last few seasons. I'm talking about Victor Arvidsson over in LA. So he, had that amazing breakout in Nashville. He like looked like he could be like a 35, 40 goal scorer, taking a ton of shots. Brian and I loved him. I remember Brian really called him before his breakout as being someone who was having a really high points per 60, but just wasn't getting a lot of minutes. And then the following season that really bared out. And then he did get more minutes and he looked really good. Then he had a couple down years in Nashville, ends up getting traded to LA. And then he was better in LA, right? He had 20 goals and 48 points in 66 games. That's a 60-point pace if he had played the whole season. Again, all these players we're looking at like having missed time, unfortunately. But yeah, Dobber has Arvidsson going even higher. He has him as a 65-point pace. So I was curious to know why we should expect Arvidsson to go higher. At least that's what I thought originally. I started to look into it a bit myself, and I did realize that Arvidsson started the season not playing on that line that ended up materializing with Trevor Moore and I'm blanking. What's his name? Trevor Moore and what's his name? The guy that came from Montreal. Oh, Phil Deneau. Sorry. Yeah. Trevor Moore and Phil Deneau, and they really clicked in the second half. And I see that that's the line that Dobber's projecting to go into next season. So do you think that Arvidsson has this next gear to get back to those prime years in Nashville and do even better than he did in his first year in LA?
I think a lot depends on injuries with Arvidsson. He's had, despite some, I guess, some very good years in Nashville, and as you mentioned, there was that he did become sort of a sort of a very highly coveted player, highly promoted player in Dobber. I remember Steve Laidlaw, the old previous managing editor, was very, very high on Arvidsson. And there was good reason for that. There was he had the opportunity on Nashville to become a top six scorer. I think unfortunately he's been slowed by some injuries. That was also the case last season, where he was held to just 66 games. So there were stretches where he was out of the lineup for a bit. He did click on that line with Deneau and Trevor Moore. It was a very good second line for LA, and one reason, I think, that key reason that they made the playoffs last year, maybe a little bit earlier than expected. I'm sort of like Bjorkstrand. I'm a bit on the fence with Arvidsson. I think there's a chance he could bounce back if he stays healthy on that line. He could have a very good productive year. Again, he's one of those after pick 100 players that I would look at who could turn out very, very well for you as well. One thing I'll just mention here is that there's a difference between point projection and point pace. So Arvidsson might be on a 65-point pace, but that assumes that he remains healthy for the entire season. But Dobber also has him projected to play only 72 games, which is resulting in 57 points. So it's probably better to take the actual projection as opposed to the pace. The pace is kind of more if he could stay healthy for the entire season. This is what you could get, but you're going to have to, if there's games you miss, obviously you're going to have to look for a replacement. I could see if everything goes right, where Arvidsson could potentially reach that pace again.
Yeah, okay. And I definitely agree with you. Like, I don't personally expect Arvidsson to play all those games. I guess the way I kind of like strategically think about it is I'll draft my players like thinking of like what they'll do for me while they're in my lineup. And like you said, then I'll find replacements obviously when they get injured. But I feel like, yeah, you don't want to take too many injury prone players in your draft because then you're really, going to have to dive into free agency. You may even run out of IR plus spots. I know that big term that Dobber uses is Band-Aid boys. Do you think Arvidsson's in that category where if let's say you're putting a cap on yourself of like, I only want like max 3 Band-Aid boys on my team or 4, like is Arvidsson, I feel like he's on the cusp. He hasn't played a full season in a while, but he's not like someone like a Malkin to me where I'm like so convinced he's going to miss 20 games.
Yeah, I'm surprised Dobber doesn't have him listed as a Band-Aid boy. He did play near full seasons in 16, 17, and then again in 17, 18. But then 18, 19, and 19, 20, he missed a good chunk of games. Last season, or 2020, 21, he looks like it was a 56 game season. He only missed 6 games, which isn't too bad. But last season, we were talking By my math, it looks like he missed 16 games because of injury. So that's a substantial chunk of games that he's missed. It's like recently more often than not, he's missed at least 10 games in a season. So I'm not sure. I think Dobber had reviewed his Band-Aid boys again, and put out the article again. But usually on the Frozen Tool page, there is a Band-Aid boy link, or not link, but the words are there that they're Band-Aid boy certified or Band-Aid boy trainee, and for whatever reason Arvidsson isn't there. So I'm not sure if that was an oversight or if he didn't list him as a Band-Aid boy. I'd be curious as to his reasons.
Yeah, so it looks like Arvidsson had back surgery at the end of last season. So I guess that's the kind of thing where on one hand you could be like, oh, good, he's like fixed now. He had the best doctors and now he's going to come back 100%. Or you could be like, oh, like, is he still the same player after going through this surgery? So again, that's something that we'll have to watch during training camp. Also, I think it's funny because Arvidsson came to the Kings last year. And I think a lot of people just like pegged him in as like, oh, yeah, he's going to be on the top line with Kopitar for sure. Like started like thinking, wow, like, and Kopitar will dish to Arvidsson. He's going to score so many goals. And like now I'm hearing like the exact same thoughts about the new like top line right wing expected to be in Kevin Fiala, right? And everyone's just assuming, well, of course, Fiala is going to be even better than he was in Minnesota because he's going to have Kopitar dishing to him. I just wonder, like, and like, I agree, like, if I were to bet on it, I'd expect that Fiala is going to be on the top line. But I wonder if should we have taken some lessons from last year and not just like assuming, with 100% confidence that it's going to be Fiala and Kopitar like linked together on the top line, I guess, with Adrian Kempe, and then Arvidsson will be on the second line. Like, should we leave some room for possibility that maybe Fiala ends up like playing with Deneau or like Kaliev plays with Kopitar? Like, I don't know. I just feel like it's one of those things where every year when I'm like super confident about a line combination with a new player on the team, I feel like 50% of the time it ends up not going the way I expected it to be.
Oh, absolutely. You should never leave anything to 100% certainty. It's the easy link to make is the star center and the winger being picked up and playing. The thing I like about Fiala though is that he never really had those top line minutes in Minnesota, and he was still productive. Him and Kirill Kaprizov both played left wing, so they were almost always on separate lines except for the power play. So even if Fiala does play on the second line, even if Kopitar isn't his center, he could still have a very productive year. So and Arvidsson, while on that line, was productive anyway. So doesn't necessarily mean that because you're on that top line, you can't be productive. That can be a bit of a fallacy to think. So, for somebody like Fiala, he could. You don't know what the coach is going to do, whether they're going to, try to stack all the scoring on one line or they're going to try to spread it out. Even coaches will try different things if the line combinations aren't gelling, or if he's just only getting one scoring on one line. The reward for that, all the scoring being on one line, is sometimes to spread it out in an effort to get some of the other lines going, and so the teams aren't sort of stacking up against the top lines if the other lines aren't productive. So you really don't know what's going to happen here. You can draft him on the basis that Fiala, on the basis that he will line up with Kopitar and have a very good year. But you're absolutely right. You cannot say that for sure.
Yeah, I guess it's just because we just saw Arvidsson sort of end up. He started the season with Kopitar, and then things changed around. But I guess, like you're saying, either way, like last year Kopitar, last year, like you said, last year Fiala put up an above point per game pace. He had 85 points, and he played the whole season in 82 games. And that was, like you said, yeah, not necessarily always being on the top power play, averaging only around 17 and a half minutes per game. I think things changed a lot between the first half of the season and the second half of the season in terms of the deployment. Like when Boldy came, that made a difference. But yeah, so even if he's not, it's kind of like you just get salivate about like what is the upside if he gets to play, more minutes with Kopitar. But yeah, even if he doesn't, he should still be like pretty decent based on what we've seen so far. You would hope, anyways. He's someone that Dobber's super high on, and I can't disagree. I wasn't planning on bringing up Fiala. I was like, don't you think Dobber's a little too high there? But yeah, okay. Let's go now to the Canucks, where I wanted to bring up Connor Garland. And again, I feel like I'm coming off as like this like negative guy or being like, what does Dobber think? But these are so many guys I can bring up. Like on the Canucks, he's got Elias Pettersson as someone who's going to have a solid season. Let me bring that up here. 74 points in 78 games. games, I'm all for that. He's got JT Miller continuing his, breakout, 93 points in 80 games. He's got Brock Besser maybe not, reaching those heights. So, yeah, so there's a lot about the Vancouver projections where I look and I'm like, yep, that's exactly what I would have expected. But yeah, the one guy that jumps out a little bit to me is Connor Garland. And the reason is, kind of similar to Arvidsson and McCann. Like, I guess they're probably in the same level of the draft. Maybe afterwards I could ask you to like choose which of those three you would take. But so Garland had that big breakout in Arizona in 2020-21, 39 points in 49 games. So smallish sample size, but he had a 65 point pace during that year. Last year in Vancouver, a lot of people thought maybe he can like get a power play one spot or like be assured, really good line mates in the top six, but he didn't end up securing that top power play and he fell to a 55 point pace, which, for a lot of fantasy leagues saw him fall to free agency midway through the season. Seems like with this projection that I'm seeing that Dobber isn't too concerned about that happening again because Garland, he has him at 63 points in 76 games. So almost a full season played. And if he did play all 82 games, that would be a 68 point pace, which would definitely be a career year for Garland, even better than that breakout in Arizona. I see that Dobber's got him projected as a top liner with Miller and Mikheyev. I guess sometimes what is the top line? Like, in Boston, Brian and I have been debating if Bergeron's not playing with Marchand to start the year, is it still a top line? If it's with Zaka and DeBrusk, but maybe if JT Miller's the center, then you just have to call that the top line no matter what. But yeah, what do you think about this Connor Garland projection? Are you as high on him as Dobber is? Because it looks like, according to Dobber, he's a guy that you like, definitely want to draft in the middle rounds of your draft. But I'm a little concerned whenever I see someone that I recall seeing in free agency on my couple division last year.
Yeah, I think I'm also with you on Garland. I think the one thing about Garland is one on the in the fantasy guide, you'll see that there are projections for first power play and second power play, and the Canucks' first unit power play is pretty solidified. It does not include Garland. It has Miller, it has Pettersson, it has Horvat, it has Besser, and it has Quinn Hughes. Connor Garland is not on the first unit power play. And you want to know how many power play points Garland had last year? He had three.
Oh, okay,
Three
yeah.
power play points. I don't see that as a formula for reaching 63 points. I think he'll exceed that total this year. But the second unit power play does not feature. It's pretty well stacked. It's going to have some good options. Like I think Garland's going to score a lot of even strength points. I think that's going to happen. The Canucks have actually got a pretty solid top nine, or potentially one that could be very, very good when you factor in the signings of Mikheyev and Kuzmenko. You've got Podkolzin, who's going to be a sophomore. He could easily take a step up in his game. He showed some flashes of brilliance, I think, in his rookie season. So, and the Canucks could arrange there's talk that the Canucks could use all of Miller, Pettersson, and Horvat as centers. So Bo Horvat could be your third line center. A player like Garland could easily be in the top six. Then they could use him on a line with Miller, and it could be a very effective duo. So in terms of even strength points, I like it for even strength points. Like the others that we talked about here, Garland is definitely a player I'm waiting for after pick 100. I don't think I'd go quite as high on Garland as 63 points. I might, 50 points seems like a more reasonable, safe assumption to me, but but who knows? He wasn't seem to be a player. He started off really well last season. Then Travis Green got fired. When Bruce Boudreau took over, there wasn't Garland's production really dipped, but then he had a real strong point per game push over his last 20 games or so last season. So it's hard to say. That one I think I'd agree with you, and I would go under that projection.
Yeah, though it is interesting, right? Like you said, 20 points in his last 19 games when the new coach came in. And obviously, Boudreau's going to stay as the coach for next season. And it's almost like on one hand, you can be like, oh, no, he only had like 3 power play points all season. On the other hand, you can say those final 19 games where he had 20 points, 19 of those points were even strength. Imagine if like he does get on the top power play, like what could even happen? So it's almost like there's a bit of a floor here if we think he could just maintain that even strength production, and then who knows, maybe an untimely injury or something, and all of a sudden he gets 15 power play points or 10 power play points. Now we're looking at someone who maybe could hit this projection. So yeah, it would be a bit of a swing, but there's obviously reason. Again, this will probably be pretty line dependent. I'm going to want to see like who he's playing with of those three centers that you brought up. Okay, how about let's go to Columbus. I guess we were talking about Bjorkstrand before, so we could go back to his former team. A defenseman that I saw as being projected pretty high, and I'm really curious to hear the reason for, because Adam Boqvist was drafted with early in the first round a few years back, and obviously a high pedigree, and then there were stretches where he was getting top power play when he was on Chicago, and like Brian and I would talk about it on the podcast, like, oh man, should people be grabbing Adam Boqvist out of free agency because he's on this top power play with Kane and DeBrincat and Taves, like back when Taves was good and like they had DeBrincat and like Chicago actually was an exciting team. Now it's almost like, okay, even if you have Seth Jones who's on the top power play, you're like, I don't even know how exciting this power play is going to be. But yeah, we're in Columbus now, and Adam Boqvist got traded for Seth Jones, and now he's like, first of all, definitely behind Zach Werenski. Like Werenski's going to get all the top power play deployment unless he gets injured. And then you look at Adam Boqvist, who still hasn't been able to break out, and a lot of it seems to be because he doesn't have the coach's favor, right? Like he's only averaged 17 minutes in average time on ice last season, which is super low for a defenseman. That's like a third pairing guy. And like I said, he didn't get a lot of power play time. And so at the end of the day, he had like a 22 points in 55 games. It's a 35-point pace. But I'm seeing Dobber is projecting him for, again, this might be the kind of thing where like the low games played. Like he only hasn't playing 64 games, but he's got 38 points in those 64 games. So when I, math it out, like being a big nerd, comes out to that 49-point pace, which really jumped out to me as like, wow, if Adam Boqvist can put up a 49-point pace, that would be like a huge year for him. It would be a bummer that he misses all those games, but imagine he doesn't get injured and he just continues that pace. That would definitely be a breakout. So I'm curious to know what's the reason for this high pace for Adam Boqvist. Are we thinking it's just like it's finally time? I guess isn't it Dobber or from that Dobber site did you guys talk about like the fourth year breakout? Is this Boqvist's fourth year? I know that's definitely a thing people talk about.
Yeah, I think he's there, and yeah, he's in fourth NHL season, although he's never played more than 52 games. I mean, we've
Right.
had some shortened seasons, but at the same time, he's 2019-20. That season ended being around 70 games. He had played 41 games. 2020-21, that was a 56 game season. He played 35 games. Last season was a full season. He played 52 games. So he's been well off in terms of number of games played. And Dobber has him projected at to play 64 games this season. He mentions in here Boqvist managed just 8 points in his last 29 games as he battled through yet more injuries. Upper body, 11 games, lower body, 5 games, and COVID, 3 games adds to a list that's surprisingly lengthy so early in his career. So, yeah, Boqvist is Band-Aid boy certified. I guess he has him pegged for a big jump anyway, maybe because it's that fourth season, or maybe it's, I don't know, maybe this is a gut feeling. I don't know. We might have to come in and explain this one for us, because otherwise I don't really know, and I might, I don't think I'd go quite as high. I know fantasy leaguers, some of them, I just one or two leagues where I think there's people that are really high on Boqvist as well, and that might be that high, being that high first round pick. He went 8th overall back in 2018. And they've been waiting for that sort of jump. But yeah, you're right. I don't think I'm quite there yet on him. It wouldn't surprise me if he reached something close to 48 points, but I'd still bet the under on it.
Right. Yeah. I guess it's up to Brad Larson. I feel like it's going to play a big part. If he could start playing Boqvist as like a 20 plus minute per game defenseman, then that'll help him get some more points. It's not as if Columbus is like stacked with D options, right? Like after Werenski, they signed Goodbranson, which was a questionable move. I guess they didn't realize they were going to be getting Gaudreau and then all of a sudden get into some cap trouble, leading to them having to give away Bjorkstrand. Then yeah, you're looking at the rest of the depth chart. Like I wonder if the listeners could name even one more. Like there's Gavrikov, who's a solid, like, just like defensive defenseman. I guess Jake Bean is there.
Mm-hmm.
One of our patron favorites, Nick Blankenberg, because he's Norm's cousin. But we'll see how many minutes he can get. But yeah, if you had to pick who's someone who's going to get more minutes between Adam Boqvist or Nick Blankenberg, because I know Blankenberg's a favorite.
Blankenberg. Yeah, that's true. There's in there, like, Goodbranson was signed to a big contract. I thought Goodbranson was on his way out, and then
Yeah.
suddenly he was signed to I think it was a $4 million cap hit in Columbus. I thought seeing him play in Vancouver, he was he was going to kind of fade out, but he had that really good year in Calgary last year. I'd say really good, but I think he sort of exceeded expectations as a third pairing defenseman. And it just seemed like Columbus just kind of jumped all over that, it just seemed odd. I mean, they obviously they had a great off season with the Gaudreau signing, but then it was like, why did you sign Branson? Because now you have to move. Now you had to move Bjorkstrand, and their blue line I don't think is that stacked anyway, and it may be to address the blue line. But anyway, it was kind of getting away from Boquist here, but that might explain like there just isn't that depth, and that might be another reason is that blank. I should maybe take a look in the actual spreadsheet. One thing I'll mention with the fantasy guide is that there's a spreadsheet that includes of more projections of what appears in the PDF, and included in there should be an ice time figure for Boquist. And I think another reason that might drive that increased point pace might be increased ice time. And you raise a good point with the with the lack of depth on the Columbus blue line, and that might be your reason right there. If you give me a minute, I can probably I can see if I can find the ice time in here.
Yeah, sure. And maybe in the meantime, I'm looking at the other Blue Jackets projections. It's kind of like a Vancouver situation in terms of like those top three centers. It's hard to know like who's going to center which line and like who's going to play with who. Like we've got Roslovic, Boone Jenner, and Cole Sillinger, and I feel like it's really hard to know who's going to be like the number one center on this team. Who's going to be the one to actually get those minutes with Johnny Gaudreau, because that's going to be the huge like windfall. I guess especially if it's like with Gaudreau and Laine. Though I know Laine and Voracek played well together, so that'll be another team where I'm really excited to find out what the lines will be. Because yeah, if it's Boone Jenner playing with Gaudreau and Laine, or playing with like Gaudreau and Voracek, like Boone Jenner could easily replicate what he did last year. But also, yeah, it could be like Cole Sillinger, who has a huge sophomore season as only like a 19-year-old now. So yeah, that's going to be a big training camp team to watch in terms of that down the middle of the ice.
Yeah, suddenly eyes are on Columbus here.
Okay, so should I jump to the next team, or did you want to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Up that. Okay.
Yeah, I can't seem to find ice time minutes for. I don't think they're in here. I think if you get a Geek membership though, you might be able to get ice time numbers from there. But I don't see it in the actual spreadsheet here. So, but it could be, and I'd have to look for it there some more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, no problem. So I'll just edit this out then.
We can just speculate, I guess.
Okay, how about next? Let's go to the Boston Bruins, a rare team where we seem to actually have some information about how the lines will shake out, at least to start the year, because there was a tweet that we retweeted that Jim Montgomery was saying that at least to start the year, he's planning on keeping David Pastrnak with Taylor Hall on the second line, being centered by David Krejci, who's coming back from Czechia, and then that would leave Patrice Bergeron to center Jake DeBrusk and the newly acquired Pavel Zacha, who the Bruins got for Eric Haula. And Dobber is clearly excited about that, or maybe he was into it even before this was announced, just because he's got good projections for both a DeBrusk and for Pavel Zacha. These are guys that, both of them had actually some stretches last year. Like DeBrusk had a really good stretch where he was getting points in a few games in a row when he got onto the top line, but he had been quiet, outside of that. And Pavel Zacha also, I remember, was earlier last season when he got on a roll with New Jersey before he kind of went quiet. But Dobber's got them both for 51 points. But, with those missed games that are always being projected in here, I'm seeing a 57-point pace for Zacha and a 55. Oh, sorry. You probably heard that. Cody. I'm just going to get my dog out of here, actually.
No problem.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, I think my wife's doing a good job of keeping my cats out of here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
All right. So Dobber's got DeBrusk and Zacha both with a 51-point projection, but once you account for the missed games played, he's got them at like a 57-point pace for Zacha, 55-point pace for DeBrusk, which would both be like big upticks over what they've done in the past. I guess those aren't like crazy numbers. Like it's not as if we're like, I'm saying like, oh, wow, like such crazy projections. But I'm just curious to know in general your thoughts on Boston and like which of those two guys, if any, would you be drafting in a fantasy league? Because there's clearly upside there if you can have a guy playing on the top line, potentially even getting a power play spot depending on how things shake out. And both, yeah, guys that have had good runs. So I feel like I'd be interested in having one of them. I don't know if I'd want to have both. So I'm curious to get your take on who you like better.
Yeah, I think the guy I would go with here is probably DeBrusque, just because he's shown that he can be productive in the Boston system. He had that great late season run. I picked him up as a waiver wire ad in a league that I won a championship in. Helped me out tremendously, just because he was getting those top line minutes. Before that, he was just kind of a player that I was meh on. He made the trade request. It looks like with Bruce Cassidy out, he's reportedly has rescinded his trade request and wants to stay in Boston. So that could, maybe he's able to sort of pick up where he left off from last season. Of course, you can't necessarily just go on what a player demonstrated on with one quarter. He seems to be line mates seem to play a real factor in whether he's going to have value or not. Like, so if he's stuck on the third line, he's really not going to be doing much for your fantasy team. But if he's on that on sort of that top line or in that top six, then I think there's something there for him. And I don't think that's unreasonable to expect to predict 51 points for DeBrusque. Zaka, I'm just kind of more, I'll believe it when I see it, just because I had him in a keeper and I just kind of ran out of patience with him. But maybe Boston's a better situation for him. One thing that I think Zaka will have going for him is that he could be looking at top 6 minutes early in the season, because Brad Marchand's going to miss the first couple months or so of the season. So they could use Zaka in the top 6, maybe even on the top line. If it's true that they're going with Krejci centering Hall and Pasternak, then maybe Zaka is elevated to that top line with Bergeron and maybe even DeBrusque. So that could be productive for both of them as well, depending on what Bergeron has left in the tank. If this is going to be his final season, how much is Bergeron really going to push it? So I think he's still a very good player, not questioning his character in any way. He's obviously proven that, but father time catches up to everybody. So we'll have to see. But in terms of which one I think I would rather have, I would say probably DeBrusque.
Yeah, I think I'm with you that DeBrusque seems to have the higher upside, just because it seems like also he has a closer track to getting on the power play potentially with the big guns. But yeah, Zaka is interesting. Rob here is saying in the chat he thinks Pavel Zaka will have a serious season. He has so much skill, just needs exposure. Yeah, he's a guy, again, like Adam Boqvist, right? A very high pedigree guy. Back in 2015, Zaka was drafted 6th overall by the Devils. And I don't know, like obviously he didn't earn the deployment, but also he never really got like a lot of ice time. I guess last season he was approaching 17 minutes a game, which isn't so bad. Like I said, he had a good stretch. He actually started the year pretty strong. He had 12 points his first 19 games, and then started to fall off. So yeah, I'm interested to see in a new situation. You always wonder if, like, you remember Dylan Strome, was a high draft pick with Arizona, and he sort of was middling and not doing anything. Then he went to Chicago and seemed to break out a bit. Not that it led to him getting an exciting new contract now. We'll see how he does in, what is it? He's not in Anaheim. He's in Washington, right? Ryan Strome's in Anaheim. Dylan Strome's in Washington. People need to try to keep their Stromes together.
Gotta keep your Stromes in check.
Which Strome would you draft next year in fantasy? If I ask you the same question about Ryan and Dylan as I did for DeBrusque and Pavel Zaka.
Oh man, good question. That's a tough one, because I do have Dylan Strome on. I just took over a salary cap team, and I have Dylan Strome on there, and he's a very reasonable cap hit. And I've had multiple people sort of reach out to try to trade for him, which usually suggests to me that I should hang on to him if others are trying to grab him, and trying to give me their higher priced players that aren't necessarily going to be as productive. On the other hand, I'm not big on Ryan Strome, especially joining Anaheim. I know he'll be a top 6 player. He's not going to have a player like Panarin on Anaheim unless Zegras really breaks out to that level. At least not in the near term anyway. The thing I like about Strome, though, if you were to draft him, is the number of off days that Anaheim has, that you could, at the center position, have somebody who's very productive for your team. And this is where you kind of get into strategy and not just pure point projections, but sort of drafting those Anaheim players. If you got a late round pick, it doesn't hurt to to use Strome, especially if you have a lot of players who tend to play on the busy nights. And the Dobber guide will tell you which teams play on the busy nights, which ones tend to have the most light night games. And you can even bring up a report on Frozen Tools for that as well if you don't want to pay for the draft guide. I'll put that little bit of information up for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. I use that schedule tool on Frozen Tools for sure.
Yeah.
To find, yeah, because you could like put it just for like the next few weeks, even when you're looking at a free agent, try to see like who's going to give you a lot of games that will actually fit into your roster. Yeah, those Anaheim guys. It's too bad Anaheim. I'm waiting for Anaheim to actually have like lots of really exciting players. Like I keep on wanting to tell people to draft John Gibson because of the off night games, but then he keeps on blowing it for us and not being worth rostering for a lot of the season. So definitely disappointing sometimes. But yeah, Dylan Strome actually, Dobber's got him for, I'm seeing here, 50 points in 70 games. He's got Ryan Strome for 57 points in 79 games. So it looks like Dobber is a bit of a Strome fan. I guess both of them are being slated right now to be 2Cs on their team. It's just a matter of who their line mates are going to be. Well, and it's also a matter if they're actually going to hold that position. But it seems reasonable. Like with Anaheim, you're looking at Zegras as the top line center, then Ryan Strome as the second line, because after that, who do you have? Like Lundestrom, Derek Grant. Like, but you could potentially see Ryan Strome playing with like a Mason McTavish, who just had a great juniors tournament. So could work out. We'll see. And then Dylan, yeah, he could play with like well, who could it be? I guess if the top line gives us Ovi and Kuznetsov, and I don't know. Sometimes they throw Connor Sherry up there. I know Brian's been suggesting maybe Connor Brown, maybe TJ Oshie. That would still leave Dylan Strome with one of those guys I just mentioned that isn't on that line. Maybe an Anthony Mantha. So yeah, he could have some pretty good line mates. Maybe a shot at the top power play. Maybe not. So yeah, some upside there for the Stromes. But I wasn't even planning on bringing them up. So let me go back to my scheduled programming here. How about a couple players that I thought Dobber was a little lower on than I would have expected. One guy that really jumped out to me is Brent Burns. Like everyone's been like salivating over this guy taking over the top power play in Carolina, and I'll admit, like myself included. But yeah, maybe I need to get myself in check a little bit here because last season he was 36. He's going to be 37. But I guess the reason why people are excited is last year at the age of 36, he still put up 54 points with the Sharks, and that was with him having to share top power play time with Erik Karlsson. The Sharks aren't as strong of a team as the Hurricanes. So I would have thought that Brent Burns now going to Carolina should be able to do something similar to what like a Tony DeAngelo did, who had like a 65-point pace. But Dobber has a big drop from Burns, not only like not close to what DeAngelo did with 65, not even that close to what Burns did last year, because Burns, like I said, had 54 points. Dobber has him projected for 48 points as his pace, and I guess over 82. He has Burns not missing any time, so that's useful if you draft him. But yeah, only 48, which isn't nothing, but not like the upside that we've seen from what Burns has done in the past and even what DeAngelo did in a similar spot. Do you think this is like a situation where maybe like kind of like what I said about Fiala, like maybe we shouldn't be like 100% confident that Burns is like the top power play guy, and maybe Dobber's taking that into account? I'm just curious to know why the decrease in points, or maybe it's just what you said about Bergeron, father time is going to end up getting everyone, and might be Burns's time, so you have to be a bit conservative with your projection.
Yeah, I read somebody saying that they thought Jacob Slavin would take over the top power play unit in Carolina, that it wasn't going to be Burns, which I'm not. I'm not sold on Slavin being that type of defenseman. I think he's better in real life than he is in fantasy. That being said, Slavin is just still a reasonably productive fantasy option, just not at the level of Brent Burns. I agree with you. I think I'd go a bit higher on Burns. I would go 50 points on Burns. I'm not sure I would go too much higher. That being said, I mean, I'm a guy who's kind of bidding on Brent Burns in a slow auction draft right now. So, but I also have to be careful into how high I go on him as well. Just because, as you mentioned, he is 37. I kind of had a few years ago, I kind of had Burns and Dustin Byfuglien kind of pegged as guys who were very, very high event defensemen, very, very strong in roto. And I was wondering about the wear and tear that it would take on their bodies, with the hits, block shots they were taking, and so on, because they were big body players that were getting into their 30s. And we've seen what happened with Byfuglien. Obviously he's out of the league. The injuries, pretty much he just sort of ran out of gas, ran out of he just couldn't pull it together anymore for a full season. I'm not going to speculate on other reasons. I think it was injuries. They didn't have series that Winnipeg had against Vegas in the conference finals. He just looked like he had ran out of gas. I just wonder if the same is going to happen with Burns here eventually. You can't say it's the same thing's going to happen for every player, but that's something that you have to keep an eye on with Burns. I know others have had him a little bit higher than I have, but I think there's a bit of caution that you have to have with Burns. I think I'd kind of have Burns sneaking into the top 100, but I think there's a lot of other defensemen that I think I would pick over Brent Burns right now, just purely from a pure point standpoint. And there's a reason to get excited now that he's with Carolina. It seems to be they're just simply a better team than San Jose was. They're not going to be pinned in he's not going to be pinned in his own zone as much, playing for the Hurricanes as he was for the Sharks. But again, you just have to be careful. Maybe injuries. You got to worry about injuries here. And Dobber has him as an 82 game player too. And that's, okay, that's
true.
Last year. He played all 82 games last season, 56 the season before. So he's been a really durable, and I could see why the 82 points here, because he's been extremely, extremely durable since about the 2014-15 season, where he hasn't missed. He's hardly missed any games. And I think I have to check, but he might still be in that sort of Ironman competition, the one that Phil Kessel is about to pass Keith Yandel on. I'm sure somebody listening will probably know for sure. But you just kind of wonder when that's all going to catch up to him. I think maybe to keep that Ironman streak intact, they're going to probably stick him out there with duct tape and glue if they have to. That he's just going to be, he could literally be like the knight on the Monty Python movie, the one with no limbs, and they would still stick him out there.
Potentially. But yeah,
I don't know. It's just, could I see him missing a game this year? Absolutely. Injuries, if there is a serious injury, that could eventually catch up to him. That could cut into your point total as well. So, I had a little bit to say here about Brent Burns, but it's because we've got a long track record on him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all makes sense, and that would be something actually to be concerned a bit about, right? Like if he's hurt but doesn't miss time, like at least if he's hurt and you could and he misses games, then you could put him in your IR and play someone else. It's almost like worst case scenario if he's hurt but still playing but just not producing as well as you wanted him to. And at that point, we have to speculate on the podcast, like is he? Because the team's not going to necessarily tell us that he's hurt, and then we're on the pod being like, what's wrong with Ben Burns? Why is he not doing as well as he did before? Like should people drop him? And it becomes really challenging. So maybe that's another reason to just be conservative, because you don't want to have to deal with a situation where you don't know whether it's like Couture a couple seasons ago just totally disappeared. He must have been injured, right? Because he was putting up a 60+ point pace season, then all of a sudden was getting nothing. So I would hate for that to happen. But so far, again, 54 points last year. So it's just a matter of being conservative because of his age and not because of anything that we've seen in terms of a huge fall off. Maybe going back really quickly. Actually, you said something that I wanted to just dive into before I go to the next player. You said you're doing a slow auction draft. Well, can you explain how that works?
Yeah, it's a league. It's a league that's been around for over a decade. What it is, and a lot of them auction drafts, and I know there are not too many in fantasy hockey. They tend to be more in fantasy baseball and even fantasy football. I think fantasy baseball, especially, where you place bids on a player, and obviously winning, top bidder wins the player. But instead of it being sort of a live draft where you have 10 or 15 seconds to outbid someone on a player, and you kind of go one player at a time, and these drafts can take 3 or 4 hours. This is one where you post, it's on a forum, you place your bid on a forum, and you have 72 hours to outbid. If you want to bid higher on a player. Otherwise, if no one has outbid you for 72 hours, then you win the player. So this I usually give a month to do this. I'm the commissioner. I didn't originally set up the league, but I took over as commissioner several years ago, and that's kind of how it works. I like it because it allows me to do bids on my own time. You don't have to try to gather everybody up for at the same time for a live auction draft, there's always going to be somebody that says, oh, I can't make it, I got to work tonight, or I've got this
Oh, for
other
sure.
commitment. And for me, it's different. I live on the West Coast, so I'm 3 hours behind everybody. Oftentimes people in the Eastern time zone want to have 5 o'clock Pacific, and I might just be getting home from work at that time. So yeah, it's a bit sort of, I like it because you can sort of place the bids on your own time, and you can sort of carefully measure your bids as well. You don't have to sort of think spontaneously.
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, we're running a league for Keeping Karlsson, the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League, which registration deadline just passed. But if people want to play, you can still register and get on the wait list. And if we can fill another division, which I think we'll be able to fill at least one or two more, so I think you'll likely get in. So if you're listening to this and you want to play, definitely go to kkupfl.com, kakupful.com, or keepingkarlsson.com/patron for more information. But anyways, I just brought that up to say that we're doing slow drafts, but not auction drafts, just like snake drafts. I was just thinking, like, for a slow auction, if you're saying 72 hours per, like, are there multiple players up for bid at the same time, or is it literally just like 3 days for each player? Because then it would take a lot longer than a month, I would
Oh
think.
yeah, multiple players. So there's literally, I think, there's 3 pages worth of players. So we've got, I think, 20 players, roughly 20 players per page. So we're looking at about 60 players that are being
Oh,
bid on
wow.
right now. We've
But how
often
do
had
you,
more. I think it's been close to 100 at one time. I think that we've got to get some more bids up on players right now. I think right now we're just still in the stage where a lot of the high end players are still being drafted on. A few maybe a handful of players have been won already, but they're still, the bulk of the big name players are still being bidded on
but how
currently.
do you strategize, like, how much to bid if you don't know if you're getting the other play? Like, let's say like you want a goalie and both like Vasilevsky and Shesterkin are out there. You definitely don't want to bid like half your budget on both, and then you're out of money. Like, how do you manage that?
Well, I keep a budget. I use a spreadsheet that helps me keep track of bids, how much cap room I have on my team. It is a keeper league, so you start the off season with players with a cap hit. It's kind of like NHL free agency, where you'll have players, and when you place bids, it's not just for the player for a single season. There's a formula that can determine the number of
Oh,
years. So you
wow.
can bid a player a 1, 2, 3, 4, and even 5 years. And you can, if you give a player a longer cap hit, you can, a legal bid would be with less, with less money. So you can kind of, longer term means lower cap hit. According, there's a formula. There's even like a little program that we use
Sounds
to
like
measure the number
sounds like
of
we have a whole we
the
could do a
amount
whole.
of your bid. So it gets a little bit complex there. It's hard to kind of explain everything on the air. It took me a while to learn the rule when I first joined, but it is a lot of fun.
Yeah, sounds cool. Like, yeah, it sounds like we would need a whole separate podcast about this league format. Because, yeah, I've always thought it would be cool to do this like concept of like a slow auction, but I just figured it would take too long. But I guess if there's multiple bids on multiple players at the same time, that could work. But
Yeah.
then I start wondering about like, but how do you? No, but anyways, yeah, okay. Let's get back to the Dobber projections, and maybe we could talk about this some other time because I'm fascinated about that. By the way, Ian, how many leagues are you in? Like, you keep bringing up these different leagues that you're in. Are you like one of these people that's in like 10 different leagues and somehow being successful in all of them?
No, no. I do. I think I'm up to 4 leagues now, which doesn't seem like much. There's others that are listening, I'm sure, that play in more. I think my highest, I think at one time that I had was like 7 or 8, and I just felt like I wasn't giving each league enough attention. So I let a couple of those leagues just kind of, I don't know. I think that the ones that didn't I think a couple of them didn't get renewed or something like that, and I just kind of let them fall off, and I didn't replace. I'm very selective. I get invited to a lot of leagues, and I honestly I pass. And there's some very good leagues out there. It has nothing to do with the quality of the league or anything like that. It's just the amount of time that I'm willing to put into it. I think you enjoy it more. I like to do more than one league, just for some variety. But at the same time, I can't handle a extremely large portfolio either. It would put me at a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah, you got to kind of find that sweet spot for yourself. And obviously, depends what's going on in the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Um, let's see here. Where should we go next? I know that we got to watch the clock a little here. We were on Washington. Rob was saying that we should have brought up a Connor McMichael. I guess I was listing all these different potential wingers for Dylan Strome. Yeah, McMichael Dobber has playing the full season, 37 points in 76 games. So we'll see if he can break out. I actually noticed also Kuznetsov is someone Dobber's a little bit lower on than maybe I would have expected. Though, I mean, if you look at his previous seasons, it's still pretty good. But yeah, last year he had that huge, I don't know if you call it breakout, I guess bounce back. He was a point per game in 2021, 22. And then Dobber has him falling a little bit. Like next year, he's got 66 points in 74 games for Kuznetsov, even though he's projected to be, the top line center for Ovechkin. I see Ovechkin still listed at getting around 50 goals, a bit of a fall in terms of his point pace. So I guess we're expecting a bit fewer assists from Ovechkin. Because, yeah, he paced for 90 points last year, which was really surprising this late in his career. But I guess you shouldn't be surprised by anything Ovechkin does. Anyways, I'm just wondering, do you think that this Kuznetsov like fallback, do you think that has to do more with like Kuznetsov potentially not being as good as he was last year, like him maybe regressing, or do you think it has more to do just like Ovi's getting older, so being Ovi's centerman needs to be regressed a little bit because probably Ovechkin's not getting another 90 points, which means the centerman's probably not getting point per game.
It could be all of that. Like the season before, Kuznetsov wasn't as effective. He had before the point a game last season, he was at 29 points in 41 games. I mean, there was, I know Washington was having some issues with COVID that season, but he was down to zero point 0.7, under 60-point pace. So I find that when I make projections, we can't just necessarily look at last season, but you have to kind of go at least 2 seasons back. And it looked like Kuznetsov didn't have a great season the season before, so maybe there was maybe he's kind of averaging out the two of them a little bit. Looking at the fact that Washington's talent, I think their scoring talent is maybe a little bit watered down this year. They've got some good players. They've managed to stock some good players, but they are losing Nicholas Backstrom. It looks like he might not play at all this year, which I think is going to, Kuznetsov could play on that line with Ovechkin. It could have a very good year, but it's going to be very much with Washington. I think teams are going to be very focused on trying to stop their top line as well. So I might put Kuznetsov a bit higher. I might put him at 70 points, but I don't think I would go too much higher than that.
Yeah, again, I guess you got to be a little bit conservative. Not like for Burns was be conservative because of the age. For Kuznetsov, just like he just had this huge season that he hadn't really done before. Though, there's extenuating circumstances. Like now he's the for sure top line center when before Backstrom, like you said, was the competition there. So I think Kuznetsov should be fine, but I'll be interested to see how that plays out for sure in Washington. Yeah, all these wingers. Okay, so I guess maybe I still have more players I could bring up, but I wanted to also kind of open it up a little bit before we end here, with just some thoughts from you, like anyone we've missed. Like you wrote an article last week, players that you're seeing being drafted too low on Yahoo, which people should definitely check out over at Dobber Hockey in the ramblings. Like, are there any players that we haven't talked about that you see as like, I don't know, you could like plant your flag right now and kind of be like, either this guy's being like especially overrated or especially underrated, that, a year from now we'll be able to go back and say like, oh, Ian called it. This guy that everyone had wrong, like he nailed. Like, yeah, I was curious to know, do you have any player you wanted to like point out right now that you see as being especially, like I said, like overrated or underrated going into next season?
Well, I think what I might do is answer that by looking into one sort of category of type of player that you could really exploit some value for this season. I'm looking mainly at single season leagues. I'm not focused so much on keeper leagues on this one, but for single season leagues, and that's centers that have fallen. I know sometimes that center is the deepest position, so you don't want to end up with a player that's going to be. You don't want to end up drafting a player high that's going to be on your bench for a lot of games, particularly busy nights. But I find that some centers that you could really exploit some value. One that jumped out at me is Mark Scheifele, who at the time I wrote the article at a Yahoo ADP of 135, which I just thought was just insanely low. Now I have to check and see. It may have increased since then, but I know he had a slight downturn last season. He had some injuries. The season just did not get off to a great start with him. He was still coming off that suspension that he had from the playoffs. It only was one game, but it just never seemed to get off on the right foot, but he still managed to score at over a point per game. We've seen more than that from Scheifele before. But I'm saying if you're getting a point per game player after pick 100, I don't care what position they play, that's extremely good value. So I think he should be drafted in the top 100. It's like you could almost focus on other positions earlier in your draft and then come back and grab a player like Scheifele, who's ranked that low. Some other examples of this, I think Braden Point is another one that maybe he's, since that amazing Stanley Cup playoff run that he had, I think in Tampa's first Stanley Cup with that core. I think he's fallen off a bit. He's had some injuries as well, but he's another player that I think is being drafted outside the top 100 that I think should be within that top 100. Rupe Hintz is even another one. He's moved over to center. I think he used to be a winger, but it looks like he's moved over to center now as well. Because I seem to say winger because somebody might say, well, he's always been a center. He's always played center, but he's had wing eligibility in Yahoo leagues before. I'm pretty sure of that. So he's a point per game player. I identified him in my most recent ramblings as a very productive power play option. And if Dallas, if the new coach there, Peter DeBoer, gives them more power play time, his first unit more power play time than Rick Bowness did. Bowness kind of gave them PP1 and PP2 kind of even distribution. Even a little bit more. Hintz could be up for a few more power play points as well. So Hintz had an ADP of 137, which was, in my opinion, was far too low. He should also be in the top 100 as well. So I think there's a few guys that you could look at for some value.
Yeah, and I think that's a good strategy suggestion. If you're seeing that there's some good centers that are falling, then yeah, if you're earlier in your draft, I mean, obviously you're not going to pass on like a McDavid or a Matthews if you have like a top 2 pick, or maybe even like a McKinnon. But like, yeah, maybe after those 3 guys, like let's say you're looking at like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a high rank, like a Barkov or a Crosby, but let's say you have a winger that you see is like pretty similar to one of those guys, and yeah, maybe take the winger and then know that you'll just, fill your C later on with like, yeah, Scheifele or a Braden Point that are falling a bit in draft. So I think that's definitely a good tip for people to consider. Yeah, at the top of your draft, you don't need to necessarily rush to grab centers. Okay, like let me see. I have some other like sort of general questions for you. Is there any rookies that you're looking to? Every year it's very hard to project who's going to do something, who's even going to end up. Like there's sometimes players that people are super high on that end up not making the league. There's also sometimes players like Cole Caulfield last year where everyone thought he was going to be like a Calder candidate. Then he ended up getting sent to the minors and everyone gave up on him. And then by the end of the year, he ended up being a superstar again. And if he had done that all season, he definitely would have had a good shot at the Calder. So yeah, is there any rookie that you're looking at targeting in your draft? Like who's the first rookie? Let me put it that way. That if you're drafting, a 1-year league next year, I'm not talking about like long-term, like upside for a keeper league. That's a whole different conversation. But if you were to just predict, is it like, I know you brought up Matty Beniers before. Yeah, I'm curious to know like who's the rookie that you're looking to target?
Yeah, I'd say Beniers is one. That was one that jumped off right off the top of my head. Just because he did very limited games last season. Obviously, he joined the Kraken at the end of the season, but 9 points in 10 games. Brand new rookie playing for a team that didn't have a lot of scoring, and he was able to put those numbers up. I think that's worth at least a late round sleeper. And one thing I'm going to say with rookies is in single season leagues, I generally don't target them, especially not that early. I mean, the exception is if a player like McDavid comes along, but who's just generational. Sidney Crosby before that, you could pick them in your top 50, but otherwise, you really don't know what you're going to get with rookies. But late in your draft, it's worth taking a gamble on one. I took a few years ago when Elias Pettersson was a rookie. I took a gamble on him in one of my leagues, and I was able to flip him for Jack Eichel in that same season. So, because the guy I was trading with was big on the Canucks, even bigger than I was. So, and that sparked a lot of debate whether I should be trading. And thought, I actually had people think, oh, Pettersson is actually going to exceed Eichel even in his rookie series. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Eichel's been in the league for, I think, 2 or 3 seasons at that point, and he was already established. So that's what you can sort of try to do, especially if you think that the rookie is if their production is unsustainable, never mind if they're going to have a great career. If you think their production for that season is unsustainable, then that's something you can try. But anyway, other rookies, I'll try to be a bit more prepared for this question that I was asked to do a radio hit on top rookies, and I absolutely drew a blank because I don't generally target them really
Right.
high. I think another one that I like here, just and maybe because he's from my backyard, is Kent Johnson of the Blue Jackets. Obviously they're going to have their top line with Gaudreau and Laine, but he's a player who could sneak on the second line. I don't think he's going to have a huge season, but I think he's someone who could have a very productive one. You mentioned Mason McTavish earlier. If he makes the Ducks, had an extremely good World Junior. It'd be another player that you could also look at. Marco Rossi, I think, is going to play for the Wild this season. I think he's going to be there full time, especially with Fiala gone. I'm not so maybe even Shane Wright. I think Shane Wright, there's a good chance we could make the Kraken this year and could also be productive. He's another player that we don't want to forget about as well. Aside from that, if you're looking at players drafted this season, it's hard to say that there will be any others who will make the jump. I doubt Slafkovsky makes the Habs. If somebody said that they think he will, but I'm going to disagree, and I don't think he does. But who knows? I could be proven wrong on that one. I've been wrong many times before. So, but yeah, I think there's even Eklund in San Jose could theoretically be on their first power play as well.
Yeah, so there's definitely a few players, and yeah, it's just a matter of taking a shot on someone in your draft and then seeing hopefully quickly whether or not they're going to be someone worth holding or not. Like last year, our Calder winner Moritz Seider, a lot of people weren't drafting him. I guess maybe the most similar option there could be like an Owen Power on Buffalo, who Rob is bringing up here in the chat. So but of course, Seider was able to take the top power play. Power is probably still going to be behind Dahlin for a little while, but you might get some good value, especially in a league with peripherals. You might want to take a look at Owen Power. I could see him playing like big minutes, but yeah, it's always tricky. And actually, we're going to do a show at some point with Victor Nuno from the Fantasy Hockey Life podcast, where we're going to go over some Calder candidates. So we'll definitely get more rookie talk. Okay, one more question for you before I let you go. Since you did write the goalie article in the Dobber Guide, so you definitely know a lot about goalies. And last week, Brian and I did a mega episode where we talked about goalies for like 2 hours and a half. We ended up releasing our goalie tiers, which was our just like idea of, not necessarily a ranking, but just like which goalies we think are similar, and then who we would like break and do a separate tier for. And I'm just curious to know, I sent you the link to our goalie tiers. Is there anyone in our goalie tiers that you think we got like the most wrong, or someone you think maybe we're too high or too low on?
I think these are fairly accurate. I would agree with you with your top tier with Shesterkin and Vasilevsky. I think those two are being drafted. They seem to be sort of drafted in their own category in single season leagues. Second tier, yeah, Saros is there. I say Markstrom is there. I might put Hellebuck in tier 3 just because of the kind of season he had. I can see the argument of putting him in tier 2. Thatcher Demko, as much as I like him, I might also put him in tier 3. He could be a tier 2 goalie by the end of the season, though. The one from tier 3 that I think I would move up to 2 is Frederik Andersen, just because he's playing for Carolina. He had a very, very good year, potential for a lot of wins. He may not have the sparkling goals against average or save percentage, but I think he's going to get the volume of starts that he needs to there. He is also playing in a contract year, although contract year a couple of seasons ago in Toronto, a lot of things went wrong, so I can't totally put it on that either. He's a goalie I'm very high on. In my aforementioned slow auction league, I'm in a bidding war with somebody there, and if this person happens to be listening, I'm going to be continuing to bid on him. So just
back
a word
off.
of warning: if you're going to outbid me for him, you're going to be paying a lot of money. So if this person is listening, I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Actually, one goalie that I noticed you mentioned in your goalies to watch article in the Dobber Guide that I'm starting to get a little bit interested in as like a super late pick that could have some upside, and I'm giving it away obviously for my upcoming auction draft, is that Eric Comrie on the Sabres is someone who's probably not getting drafted in most fantasy leagues, but it does kind of seem like he should be the starting goalie for the Sabres. Right? Like they have Craig Anderson, who's very old and probably not meant to have a huge workload. And then they have Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who could easily start the season in the minors because he's eligible to do that. And they have Comrie and Anderson. And Comrie had a decent year last year in the few games he played. And Buffalo, we just talked about like Owen Power, like they're an up and coming team that might not be the typical terrible Sabres of old. So I wonder if you're in a league where it's hard to come by goalies, definitely don't have Comrie as your number one and be depending on him for all of your success. But if you can get some other goalie and then like get Comrie late, I don't know. I'm interested in him. I agree with you that everything you wrote about him here, that he could be someone that people should be watching.
Yeah, he's a super deep sleeper, I think, Comrie. I don't think you're drafting him any higher than your goalie three, but he should in a 12-team league, but he could provide very good value in there. In my slow auction draft, he almost went for almost the minimum salary. And then the Buffalo fan in the league came in and at the very last, like at the last hour, came in and placed a bid on him. And now he's back in being bid on again here. So just saying, hey, look, and the Buffalo fan must know, hey, Comrie could be our starting goalie this year. In terms of one of the things that Dobber mentions, in terms of if you're trying to figure out goalie situations, one very key area to look at is contract situation. Which goalie has the highest cap hit? Which goalie has the highest term? And whatever goalie that is, that's who usually the coach will commit to as the starting goalie, just because they've invested the most in that goalie. And oftentimes, quality of play may not even factor in as much as contract situation. Like one goalie would really have to play horribly, and the other goalie, the less expensive goalie, would have to play really well in order for that to change. Florida was a good example of that when Spencer Knight came up. Bobrovsky was not playing well at all, and people said, "Well, Spencer Knight should be the starter." But and I said, and last offseason I held and I said, no, Bobrovsky's going to be the starter. He's going to be the starter, and he was because of the contract situation, because of the amount of money that they had invested in him. It's not so pronounced in Buffalo. You don't have as his cap hit isn't that much higher than Craig Anderson or Subban, but he's invested. They've invested in Comrie for a bit longer, so I could see them giving him a crack at it. But you never know. Craig Anderson, you never know. He's hung around this long, and he could still. He didn't play terribly last season, and I think Buffalo has. I as much as I don't think there's quite a playoff team yet in the East. I think they're on the way up, and it could be, and I'm not 100% committing to Comrie. I shouldn't say he's 100% going to be their starting goalie, but I think he's the favorite.
Yeah, so again, I agree with you. Like this is a number 2 or number 3 goalie on your team. Just like I'm looking at the goalie tiers, and we have him way down tier 7, with the guys who we just have no idea if they're going to be a starter or not. Maybe I'd move him up a little bit, that just because I'd rather have him than like who do I have here, Aiden Hill or like whoever. Okay, anyways, Ian, this has been a blast. I mean, I could keep asking you questions forever. You obviously are so knowledgeable. You've been writing all these ramblings on Dobber like since forever, so you're like just as much obsessed about fantasy as I am. Obviously, and you're also in all these leagues. I'm sure everyone really appreciates you coming on and sharing all of your knowledge. Is there anything you want people to check out in particular? I guess we've already talked about most of your work. Was there any, or like, how can people like keep up with everything you're up to?
So yeah, the fantasy guide, mentioned that at the start of the show, but if you haven't purchased yet, go to the Dobber site and do that. As far as what I do over at Dobber Hockey, I write the ramblings at least 2 per week, usually on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday. I fill in. I also do every other Friday as well. Mike Clifford and I usually alternate on that. Also do the top 100 roto rankings as well, where I rank players from where I ranked it. It's only goes to 100, but it could be something that could help you in the early rounds of your draft. I try to keep up with that, so I'm really welcome to hear people's feedback. There's probably some player rankings that I haven't accounted for. So, by all means, if you have a look, use them. If, you suggest any changes, I'm always open to at least examining it a little bit more, I guess. Also the managing editor, so I post a lot of the articles as well, and also recruit writers as well. So if there's any up and coming writers out there, anybody who wants to sort of take a crack at writing, I'm usually, we do get openings from time to time as well. So yeah, just a lot of the other stuff like the collaborative articles and that. We just finished up many of the writers just finished up the Dobber off-season fantasy grades article. So you can go in team by team and sort of look at each team from a fantasy perspective as well. So I wrote a few of the articles myself. I did the Vancouver article, the Colorado and the Calgary articles myself, and other writers did the rest of them. But we had a really good group effort on those ones as well. And I sort of the focus, which allowed me to focus more on sort of organizing and collaborate, facilitating.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing site. There's so many good articles. And so, yeah, people should definitely check it out,
Yeah.
dobberhockey.com. And your work is great. I always get excited when I see that you've written the ramblings. I forgot to
Thank you.
mention, again, at the top of the show, I said that we're doing a giveaway. So, for those of you who want to have a chance at a free Dobber guide, I thought of a hashtag. Okay, so this is what you got to do to enter. I'm kind of flying off the seat of my pants a little bit. But like Ian was talking about how there's some good C that are falling in drafts that you may be able to get a good value, like a Shifley or a Braden Point. So how about don't? Okay, this is really terrible. Okay, don't you forget about C. Get it? It's like a word play for that famous song. So if you tweeted
Hmm.
us with that hashtag,
I know that one. It was a
don't.
Canucks goal song last year.
Oh, it was.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, okay,
yeah.
there you go. So you're a
Kind of.
Canucks fan. I can tell. How do you think the Canucks are going to do this year? By the way.
Um, Kind of on the fence. Guardedly optimistic that they'll make the playoffs. I think they will, but you're kind of in that. I think more accurate to say they'll be in the bubble of teams that will be competing for a playoff spot.
Yeah, are you excited about this Kuzmenko guy that they brought him from the KHL? Do you think he's going to do something? Dobber doesn't have him. He only has him 29 points in 72 games. Do you think he could do better?
Yeah, it's
So
hard
hard
to
to tell.
project a player like that just simply because with the KHL, you never know. You could be, I won't say you'll be the next Panarin, but they've been able to, Panarin has come from there. But then, you have a guy like Shipachayov who just kind of faded out very quickly in the NHL. So you never know what he's going to be. The double-edged sword for the Canucks is if he has a very good season, then they're probably not going to be able to afford to keep him. And he'll probably go off the free agency and play for somebody else's team just because the Canucks are so tight against the cap. Um, but I think I might go a bit higher. I might go close to 40 points on him. But that again, that could be just me being a bit too optimistic.
Okay, who would you draft first? I know I'm just keeping you now because
No, that's fine.
Kuzmenko or Mikheyev as a new Canuck on the team. Who do you think is going to get more points?
I think I'm going to go Mikheyev just because he's more of a known quantity. I didn't say a known quantity necessarily, but we've been able to see that he is capable of something in Toronto. We never really got those first line minutes there, but he was very productive in the role that he was in. Um, he's had a couple of injuries, of course. That's been a problem, but I think in terms of their top nine, it's a very good signing for the Canucks. Even if even if their cap situation is a little bit tight, he could turn out to be a very good player.
Yeah, they're definitely an interesting team. I guess it's mostly the defense that's the question mark for this team, and hopefully just Thatcher Demko could stand on his head, so they don't even need necessarily to have such great D, but you don't necessarily want to depend
Yeah,
on that.
I
Okay,
think that's
anyways,
the
what?
plan.
Okay, so what was I saying here? Yeah, so if you tweet at Keeping Karlsson, include Ian in there. What's your Twitter again, Ian?
It's Ian underscore Gooding, spelled out IAN underscore GOODING.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like your friends' phone numbers at this point. Like we already follow you on Twitter, and so like I don't need to like memorize your Twitter handle because I just see your tweets all the time. So yeah, it's sort of like having your friend on your phone. But yeah, definitely follow Ian. Tag me. Tag at Keeping Karlsson. Tag Ian. Hashtag Don't you forget about C, and you'll be entered into a giveaway, which I guess we'll do in, let's say, a week from now, to get a free Dobber guide. But you know what? If you don't win the guide, I would definitely just buy it because it's not that much money and it's like super valuable, as you've heard, so much more than what we've discussed on this show. So thanks so much again, Ian, for coming on. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening. Like I said, it's not too late to join the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League and also support our podcast. If you go to keepingkarlsson.com/patron, you can find more information about that. But yeah, let's cue the outro music. And normally Brian would read some credits here, but I don't have that available at the moment. So yeah, just once again, hope everyone enjoyed the show, and we'll see you with more content in the next week as we ramp up to our finally starting the season. Sorry. Ramp up to finally getting into our drafts and then starting the NHL season. I'm so excited. And yeah, thanks again, everyone. Have a great night. Until next time, just remember that fantasy hockey is for everyone. All right. Such a fun show, Ian. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, it was amazing. So, yeah, I'll just get this out sometime today. I'll edit it and I'll let you know when it's out. But yeah, this is amazing. I'm sure people are really going to love it.
Sure. Yeah, I usually get the emails when you're
Oh yeah, exactly. I email you when I release it, so then you'll know.
I'm not. It's usually Dobber's day to post, so he usually posts them. But if it falls on like a weekend, if you guys do your 32 beats, or if you have like a weekend one or short shifts, actually, I end up posting those because they fall on my day. So yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Anyways, and also thanks to everyone watching live. I guess I'll end the live stream now. But yeah, thanks for taking some time out of your morning. I guess let's all go have a nice lunch now, except for Ian, who I guess is just gonna have breakfast since he's 3 hours behind.
Mid-morning snack now.
Enjoy. Okay, see you everyone. Bye.